No two crises are alike. You can plan to mitigate your threats and say, we got a playbook for this, a playbook to move the president, a playbook in case a bomb goes off. But it all goes out the window in a sense when another crisis comes up because it's not exactly the same. But what is the same is the infrastructure that you built to handle any crisis. You still have the capability to adapt, improvise, overcome. You get your team around you, and it doesn't matter what happened. You're going to turn to your right-hand person and say, I need communications. I need security. I need something. And they're going to go and do what they need to do because they know that's their job, is to figure out a solution to the problem that's at hand.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. Today, we are in for a treat. We have a speaker who is a guest for the second time on our podcast, a near and dear friend of mine and somebody who's been in the business for a really long time. I just want to welcome with open arms and open heart, retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Darling. Welcome to the podcast.
Seth, how great is it to be with you for the second time? I feel like Donald Trump, who had 2 state visits to the UK. I have 2 visits to Seth Deckman's content creator here. It's outstanding.
You know, a lot of the industry leaders speak about visits to this podcast on the same level as a visit to the UK and meeting the royalty. So I'm not surprised, but I'm honored as well. And thank you. Robert, I just want to give a shout out to our, I know only your parents call you Robert, so I'll ease off on that, Bob. Our audience keeps coming back for amazing content, amazing speakers, amazing ideas. And I just want to thank them. For the first timers, appreciate you giving us a shot. Like us, love us, subscribe, share and share alike, because we're in for a ride today. You have achieved a lot. You are a business owner. You served in the military with distinguished honors. You were in combat, and you're an author. Last century, you also played hockey as a young man, ice hockey, that is. But we're coming into a year ahead of us that marks the 25th anniversary of one of the most historic moments in our country, if not the world. It's the 25th anniversary of the 9/11 attack on the United States. Our audience comes for personal and, professional insights, breakthroughs, opportunities. We're going to touch on a lot of things, but I just want to start off with asking you about your 25-year retrospect of, if you could synthesize it down to what has endured in your message that you share from your perspective, and how we might be able to benefit from that.
Thank you, Seth. What a great question. So I got permission to do this talk in 2010. So I've been really on the road for the last 15 years, like you, meeting thousands of people every single year. At first it was, hey, just tell me the inside story of what it was like to be in the White House during the attack of America. And then it kind of morphed into, not only did that event happen, but look at all the events that are going on today to keep us safe. All the Marines and soldiers and airmen that are deployed, the first responders who are going above and beyond, the Homeland Security folks that's merging agencies. And then I took it a step farther and I realized that none of that even works without our audience, without the American public. And then I said, wow, the farmers and the truckers and, the doctors and everybody in every form of work around our nation is enabling all those other things to occur. So I just came up with, over the last 15 years now, and since 9/11, this sense of American gratitude. Though that happened, we need now to reflect on and remember those people, but we need to celebrate the true greatness of our country. And that's the people you and I serve every single day. They are the ones who make up the fabric of this great nation of ours.
You refer to, you got permission in 2010 and you've been doing it for 15 years. I want to share with our audience, again, who we so appreciate coming back and listening and viewing with us, that you were not only in the White House, you were in the bunker, or as I've learned, it's called the Presidential Executive Operations Center. Is that right? PEOC?
Emergency.
Emergency. And it is just one of the few people in America who was in the PEOC, in the bunker, during that time. And that's where the story originates from. But the story begins much farther back than that. When you enlisted, share with us a little bit about that part of, what was the impulse? Not that it was impulsive. I mean, impulse in the seed, the origin of you getting into the military.
Seth, so what happened, I went to college. I went to Iona College in New Rochelle, New York. This is back in 1983. I was a freshman on campus. My goal was to play ice hockey that you mentioned early on and to learn how to become a stockbroker. I had this, I have three brothers. We're all close in age. We've had hand-me-downs my whole life. My goal was to get wealthy. All of a sudden, in October of 1983, the Beirut bombing happened in Lebanon. And everyone was talking about Hezbollah and terrorist organizations, and we lost 241 Marines. The upperclassmen who were juniors and seniors ran right down to the recruiter, the officer selection officer, the OSO, and were signing up to become pilots and infantry officers. And I was like, hey, I never even knew the Marine Corps had jets and helicopters. This is kind of cool. I want to go talk to them too. That recruiter, that OSO, brushed me aside and said, are you doing an exploratory trip here today? Well, the Air Force is down the hall. The Marine Corps is looking for leaders. We want men and women who are going to stand in front of a platoon-sized force, go into combat, and win our nation's war. And he brushed me back. And I was so taken aback by that I couldn't wait to prove him wrong. And all the rest of my 3 years in college until I was a senior was preparing to be a second lieutenant. And the day I graduated, which is June 7th of 1987, I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. And my goal and my aspiration was to go and fly attack helicopters in defense of our nation.
And that's the point of departure of the story. And it's not a straight line by any means, like none of our lives are. But that was the start that had you end up in the bunker on 9/11. And here's where I want to connect the dots. You were paying attention. You were demonstrating critical thinking. We got attacked in Beirut, the American embassy, the base. 283 died. Is that right?
Yeah, 241 Marines killed, but we lost 3 or 4 other people for 244 total.
And the desire to serve, the desire to make a difference, the desire to impact, albeit still forming, was there. And this officer said to you, leaders. And leaders aren't always a title or a rank. They're people that just want to take the reins and get their hands dirty and be responsible. So connect that sensibility, that virtue, to when 9/11 happened. We've got the towers, we've got the Pennsylvania cornfields, and we've got the Pentagon. And your commanding officer said to you, I'm paraphrasing, go to the White House and see what they need. You were in the Eisenhower building next door. Take it from there.
First of all, I flew President Clinton around in Marine One. I was a co-pilot for the president and a pilot in command for Vice President Gore, and we would support him worldwide. But that squadron had one position, a staff position in the White House military office, airlift operations, where we were responsible for moving all the limousines, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and phones in advance of our president worldwide. So it's a huge logistics office, with a huge logistics budget. And I was handpicked to go up to the White House, stop flying, suit and tie, and be a part of the White House military office. One of the more senior officers in the office, I rose to the top and I did a lot of presidential logistics missions in support of our president. So I was responsible that week for his package to Sarasota, Florida. So on September 10th, the president left. Everything was already down there, limousine, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and we were monitoring that trip. If a helicopter broke, we had a backup. If the limousine went down, we would get another one. Our job was to make sure all the equipment was functioning and where it needed to be. So I showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning on September 11th to have our daily brief. How's the president doing? How's all the equipment in place now performing? When all of a sudden everything changed at 8:46, somebody came running into our office. Like you said, we were in the Eisenhower Executive Office building adjacent to the West Wing. And they said, quick, turn on CNN. Apparently a small airplane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. So like the rest of America, the rest of the world, we worked our way to the TV set, turned on, and couldn't believe the size of the hole in the North Tower on such a clear blue day in the city of Manhattan. The first thing out of our mouth is, that's a pretty big hole for a Cessna. There's got to be a lot more to this story than we know. And working in the White House, now information flows quickly. We learned soon after American Airlines Flight 11, it departed out of Boston Logan Airport on its way out to Los Angeles, California, lost communications over Albany, New York, down the Hudson River at over 500 miles an hour into our North Tower. The day was changing. Literally, Seth, if I could continue, I would just tell you a few minutes later in 9:03, the entire world, to include us in airlift operations, we saw United Airlines Flight 175 come into view. I remember yelling up at the TV set going, hey, what's this moron doing, trying to get a good look at the hole in the North Tower? And we watched it like the world watched it hit the South Tower at what looked like full power to us. And we knew it was a terrorist attack. Then everything changed in the White House. My boss came immediately into airlift operations and refocused us. Forget the president's logistics package. He's good to go. We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding right before our eyes in the city of New York.
That's the moment where people like with JFK or others in history knew where they were. I was in Baltimore. You and I have broken bread and shared this story a million times. Maybe not a million, but many, many times. But at some point, you find yourself in the bunker, right? And what I want to underscore to our audience and to our viewers and our listeners is that, you know, we have a special relationship with Lieutenant Colonel Robert Darling. You know, to have started your keynotes being delivered to all these amazing groups through our agency is a source of pride and a source of honor. And, you know, we see it as a service because your message carries crisis management, communication skills, leadership skills, dealing with chaos, dealing with uncertainty, preparation, civics, a civics lesson, patriotic element to it, the idea of service and serving. So there's so many angles that literally every walk of life, whether you're blue collar, white collar, rural, urban, boomer, Xer, whatever it is, can relate to it in every which way. It's so much more than lifting the curtain and getting behind the veil of what happened on 9/11 from your unique perspective in the bunker. That's why I'm just beating the dead horse here, because at some point, you know, the famous picture of Mr. Card, you know, speaking into the president's ear while he's reading to the school children, and you know, what is he saying? And that's the moment. And they take the president and isolate him, and they isolate the speaker and the vice president, but your commanding officer or your direct report, however it's called, said, Bob, go do this. What was that? And it was almost the same. I'm maybe forcing it, but when that happened in 83 in Lebanon in October, it was the same. There was no second thought. You were like, what? We're being attacked? What about my family? What about my kid? What about my wife? No, I'm going to serve. And walk us through that.
That's powerful, Seth, because you're right. He came in, he said, everyone stop what you're doing, eyeballs on me. We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding right before our eyes. We were originally in the Eisenhower building until we had an airliner overfly the White House, and another airliner eventually hit the Pentagon, American Airlines Flight 77. For the second time in American history, the first time being the War of 1812 and 1814, all the loudspeakers blared to life, evacuate the White House. Everyone's got to go to their alternate site to do what they do every day from, the top of our nation's government. So that colonel grabbed me and was telling me I can't stay here. And I was telling him I can't go. I have things to do for the president. He's going to need, wherever they take him, limousines, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and phones. And he ordered me across the street to go underground into the President's Emergency Operations Center. I've been there many times. It's run by the White House Military Office. It's a deep underground bunker, nuclear hardened. We don't tell our enemies how deep it is or the capabilities of the bunker. But on 9/11, it's becoming the main hub of operations because Washington, D.C., Virginia, over on the other side of the Potomac River is being attacked. So I grabbed the planning kit. I head out. Seth, Secret Service let me in. I'm before a bank vault on steroids. I request permission to enter, and I'm going down here to do logistics. The first person I see is Vice President Cheney's military aide. And I walked up to him and said, Tom, I know you're busy with all the military members doing their job down here. I'm here to do logistics. I'll stay out of your way. And he said, Bob, forget logistics. I need help. Answer the phones. They're ringing off the hook. So I looked around and I found the console and I ran over there and dropped the planning kit at 9:52, 7 minutes after the White House was ordered evacuated. When I picked up the phone, it was a direct link to the Situation Room in the West Wing. And the gentleman said, we have another hijacked aircraft 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, inbound. And when I turned to report that information to the military aide, Vice President Cheney was standing inches from my face going, Major, what do you got? And it just changed my entire role and my perspective on everything that day. I became a military liaison, no longer a logistics officer, but a military liaison to the Vice President of the United States while he's giving orders to the Pentagon.
I just want to underscore one thing in particular. You came down prepared and you had, I don't know the word, the manual of operations, you had an emergency book, you had a kit that, I don't know, it's the index, it's the end. What do you do in an emergency type of procedures, right? And those are important. And those are part of standard operating procedures. Everything came undone. No hyperbole. Everything is an overused word. Everything came undone all at once. And as prepared as you are, not just you, the Marines, the military, whatever rank you are for the assignments and the duties that you have to execute, you said you threw the book, whatever, put it off to the side, all bets are off, and you're prepared, but now no longer you're flying blind, so to speak. Is that accurate? Speak to that a little bit, because Bob, our audience, professionals, business owners, many are meeting professionals that you deal with a lot. This happens sometimes at their events. Power goes out in a convention center. There's a hurricane and the airport's closed. There's problems with the caterer. There's problems with the food and beverage in the expo. And as much as you plan and you have an A, a B, a C to go to, sometimes you got to be dancing in the moment. Speak a little bit to that.
It's a great point, Seth, because no two crises are alike. You can plan to mitigate your threats and say, we got a playbook for this, a playbook to move the president, a playbook in case a bomb goes off. But it all goes out the window in a sense when another crisis comes up because it's not exactly the same. But what is the same is the infrastructure that you built to handle any crisis. You still have the capability to adapt, improvise, overcome. You get your team around you, and it doesn't matter what happened. You're going to turn to your right-hand person and say, I need communications. I need security. I need something. And they're going to go and do what they need to do because they know that's their job, is to figure out a solution to the problem that's at hand. So yes, the playbook went out the window, but not the ability to compartmentalize, not the ability to communicate, to give orders, to delegate, to do all those things that you do even in your private and personal lives. On some level, you take the information you have and you start parsing out what you need to your team. And on 9/11, it was no different.
How do you decide to make choices in a quick, fast way versus avoiding or being careless, you know?
Listen, human life is what we care about most. If you are in a situation with imperfect information and lives are at stake, you are going to do the very best you can based on your intuition and your knowledge. If you have time available, you're going to start asking those around you, what do they think? What does their intuition tell them? Is there another way to handle this event? And that's great. You got time on your side. But we always go to the clock when something happens and go, is human life at risk? And do I have time? And if one or both of those don't exist, something's happened, you got to have the courage to make the call. What we learned on 9/11 was we were willing to take lives out of the sky, American lives, out of the skies to protect American lives on the ground. The courage that it took to make those decisions was what resonated so much with me. As you said, we were pilots. We learn how to compartmentalize. We handle emergency procedures all the time. But now you're talking about more than just yourself. You're talking about human life, and having the courage to make the call to save as many people as you can in a moment's notice was everything.
Yeah, I want to reiterate to our audience, and I know they're really leaning in heavy here on making sure that they get every little tidbit of this, because not only is it 25-year anniversary this year coming up, and everybody knows where they were on this date, if they were alive or if they were born afterwards, they certainly know it's a recent historical moment. But the thing that, is just evergreen, is just a constant, steady through line here, is the need to be in communication. You talked about, you can have your plans and no two crises are alike and things can get thrown out the window. Okay, that's an accurate statement. But you talked about structure, phones, communication lines, when those break down. Those are important too. But then it's the how you communicate and what you communicate. Is there a certain order and a priority and just kind of an intuitive or a taught methodology that you use as an approach in managing crises?
Yeah, we do. And especially in the Marine Corps or the military, they teach us brevity is key. Okay. Tell us what you know, tell us what you need, and we'll tell you how we're going to deliver it to you. One of the things that's very important as you're a strategic leader, a senior leader in your organization, is don't tell your people how to solve a problem. Tell your people the problem you need solved. And you let your teammates, the ones you work with every day, the ones you trust, and come up with the solution. And that was key on all levels from the National Command Authority on down. What is it the vice president and the president need? Tell us, and we'll get back to them and we'll determine where the fighters are coming from. What are the plans? What Air Force base are we taking the president to? When are we having a national level press conference? How are we getting people to New York to save lives? All those decisions will come into place because The people that work for you, Seth, know what your commander's intent is. They know you have to save lives, get people out of harm's way, and then start the recovery process for either your organization or, in this case, our nation.
We're going to put your speaking profile on our on the show notes here, and how to purchase your book, and how to find out how to book you, and availability. You know, the keynote that you're giving, we're going to sunset at the end, at the after 9/11 of 2026. You're moving on to different stages and different phases of your life. You'll continue to keynote speak, but on other topics. Share with us a little bit about what's exciting you, what's next for you personally and professionally, and what you're looking to create, building on the nearly 2 decades of giving this speech, the 25 years since this impactful incident.
Seth, like you and I talked about offline too, I learned so much from you. You know, when I first started out in this business, I had nothing more than a story to tell. And you took me under your wing and gave me the ins and outs of this business. So now, with the 25-year anniversary coming up, everyone's going to want to know what happened. Many Americans weren't born, and now they're in positions of leadership. It's good to know our history. And it's good to know where to take our history and how they should develop themselves as the future leaders to defend our country going forward. But it is time for me to move on. My passion is to build resilience at the lowest levels of every organization. So I started Flash Emergency Management. I go into organizations and say, what are your risks and how are we going to mitigate them? What are your communication plans and how are we going to make them better with alternate communication? What's the impact of crises on your organization? How long can you be down, out of the game before you start losing market share and maybe even lose your business? I want to make sure 9/11 never happens again, but I want to do it from the ground as high as I can take it. And my passion is crisis management, crisis leadership, business continuity, and working with small organizations to make sure that they don't suffer the same fate as 60% of small organizations do today, every time they can't recover from just the smallest of crises.
Yeah, well, I know, I speak for myself. Our business could benefit from that, having a plan in place and knowing what to do. You know, we're global, we're small, but we're a global organization. We have people on 5 continents, and communication is key. And we've had some breakdowns, and I think adaptively, because the desire and the need has been there, we found ways to communicate. But you got me thinking a little bit about what we need to do to have, at the very basic level, some plans and some structure and some go-to know-how to keep everybody in communication and make sure, we're serving our mission as well. So I'm excited for you on that. And thank you for the accolades. It's been a great journey. Bob, again, I can't underscore it enough. For those that are interested in bringing Bob into a keynote, and we don't do this a lot on our podcast, you have to reach out. This is not a speech about gossip or what happened behind closed doors. This is a speech about making a difference, having a moment that is historic, and stepping in and doing what it takes. I know you picked up the phone and there were prime ministers of our greatest allies, and at the same time you were moving furniture around the room to accommodate some of the cabinet so that they could gather together and have deep conversations with Vice President Cheney, Dr. Rice, and the like. So really, there was no task too big or too small. I do love the aspect of the civics part of the conversation. Walk us through a little bit. I know the first 3. I don't know I think Secretary of State is the 4th. So it's the President, the Vice President, the Speaker of the House. I think it's Secretary of State and then Secretary of Defense. Walk us through the civics part of that and how they had to be separated out, and relate that to crisis management from the ground up for organizations that you work with in your day to day.
And you're absolutely right. You have that order of precedence, is what we call it. Correct. Obviously, the president, commander in chief, leader of the free world, he's number one. But should something happen to him through the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, we would transfer powers to our vice president. So in times of national emergency, we always have to get the president and vice president to safe locations. Got to be in communication with each other, but they have to be apart and safe. So if something happens to one, we have the other. We care then about the Speaker of the House, third in line. Some people would say the Senate pro temp, but the Speaker of the House is really above the Senate pro temp. And then we turn to the senior cabinet level officials. And then the first one in line is the Secretary of State. Beyond him or her, it really doesn't matter, because any one of those cabinet level officials can become acting president of the United States. In the interim, should we lose everyone else, anyone, the Secretary of Interior or Energy or Commerce, can be sworn in by any commissioned officer or justice to assume the presidency in lieu of an election to be held at some point in the future. They're acting president of the United States until an election is held. In your business, to relate it back, we talk about succession planning. What happens when the boss is either out of touch when something goes wrong, or even worse, he's been hurt? How do we transfer authorities and decision-making capabilities to number 2 and number 3 and 4? You may do it on paper and it seems so seamless, but do all your vendors know? Do all your employees know? Do they understand that when this happens, the authority is actually going to be transferred? How is authority transferred? Under whose orders? It can get very sticky, very complicated, and very time consuming. And what we do is go in there and run tabletop exercises and take out the leadership for the sake of the exercise to see how well the others come together to form a leader. And you'll be so surprised, Seth. It's not the person you would assume. Sometimes it's the most mild-mannered person that just happens to have the intuition, cognitive knowledge, and the ability to step up, compartmentalize, and have the courage to make decisions. It's fascinating to see, but listen, our country is very, very good at it. We've been standing proud, coming up on 250 years. We've been doing it right. So I'm just proud to have this call to action to go out and make it even better.
It's awesome. I was grinning, smiling inside a little bit. It's not a smirk. This is also relevant to families. My father passed away very suddenly, and we didn't have any of that in place. And it was a scramble. Mm-hmm. And it was traumatizing. It caused a lot of chaos. There was a lot of indecision. There were a lot of poor decisions. We lacked information. We lacked clarity. We lacked direction. We lacked the literal power to be able to take care of certain things, particularly financially. This is something, when I got married and had a family, that we put in place, and it has to be revisited and it has to be spoken of. It can't just be like set it and forget it. Is that what you find in the work that you do?
Absolutely, Seth. It gets built and then it gets forgotten. And then that binder behind the executive assistant's desk goes bye-bye. No one knows what's in it or where it is. This has to be a part of leadership. Now it's becoming mainstream too. You don't just go to Ivy League schools to learn how to run Fortune 500 businesses. You now have to take a crisis leadership, a crisis management program, in addition to the bottom line, maintaining the stock price and the stakeholder value, and find out how are you going to protect your people. As a new college kid coming out looking for a job, they're going to start asking, what are your safety protocols? What response team am I on? What are the yellow, green, and red codes that would tell me I can work from home or I got to go to an alternate site? And with your family, at least ask them, if the phones went down, where's the Home Depot that we're all going to meet at 6 p.m.? If we lose touch, just have that in place.
Yeah.
So they all show up, and then you form a plan from there, looking at each other face to face.
A simple thing that you can call it low hanging fruit, but when we're talking about the safety, whether it's your organization and your employees or your clients or your children, um, my children know our phone number by heart. Many people don't know phone numbers anymore. And if you're out of battery or there's a power shutdown or the phone gets stolen or lost, you need to have this information. So simple things like that, but the sum of a lot of little things like that fortify that structure and a pathway to give people access to succeed in these crisis type of moments. Bob, we're coming to the end of this conversation. I could go on and on. I've seen you speak dozens of times. We've had dozens of conversations about this over the years. Leave us with that one enduring quality or observation or distinction out of this tragedy that speaks to the American people or the ethos of our day-to-day life.
Sure. And probably the most important thing we have as Americans is we're all still standing. Because when we are attacked or we are threatened, we immediately put our politics aside and we come together as the United States of America. And our enemies even know that's true. They're purposely working to try to divide us from within on issues because they don't want to deal with us as a united front. So here we are still standing 25 years. It's going to come up on 9/11. And it's because through it all, we all want security, prosperity, and safety for our families and our friends and our organizations. And ultimately, we want our nation to succeed. And as long as we keep that fabric woven tight, we're going to be okay no matter what.
That's a beautiful message. And I'd like to editorialize a little bit here, if I may. I also feel that the country that we've developed and created, the good and bad, we're under the microscope, whether it's because of Hollywood, all the media companies, the success that we've been able to have an impact on the world, whether it was in world wars or technology. And it's a double-edged sword. It's the impact, the positive progression of the world and society, but we're also under the microscope. And so as much as the positive accomplishments have a spotlight on it, all the negatives do. The breakdown in communication on 9/11, the dispersion of a cohesive type of security communication system and apparatus. So that opens the door to a lot of conspiracy theorists or a lot of negative Nancy's and hindsight and Monday morning quarterback that say, look, this was wrong. You were bad. This didn't work. This was a breakdown. If this were in place, this wouldn't have happened. It happened. It's a tragedy. It's been traumatic. Lives were lost. Families have been impacted for generations. But I stand on the fact that we pulled together, just like you said, but we've learned from the mistakes. We've built organizations and institutions around it. And there is a cultural ethos around coming together in a time of crisis, owning the breakdowns, owning the mistakes, owning all the foibles, all the stresses and messes that get exposed that everybody in the world can point at and make you wrong and be right about, but still move forward. And I don't know, I don't want to sound pontificating or making a sermon or anything, but I know where I was in Baltimore and people in my building, this gentleman trained dogs for search and rescue. He got in his van, he had 3 German Shepherds, and he just drove down to the Pentagon. He wasn't affiliated with any armed services, any emergency medical technicians, anything. And he stayed down there for days with his dogs, helping, trying to find anything in the rubble that could help the mission going forward. Just incredible.
And that's a true American spirit that you just described, that we tap into every single day. That's why, Seth, I'm so excited for this upcoming year to be a partner with you to go out and remind your audience, our audiences around this nation, that just how good we have it, just how good we need to hold on to it, and never lose sight, like I said, of living in the greatest land in the world.
Yeah. And Bob, life is hard, but life is good.
Life is good.
So just thank you truly, this has kind of become trite, for serving, for continuing to serve, for being there in the darkest hour, and the ego aside, even your family aside, putting yourself forward, and having that impact that just has a ripple effect through generations. So just thank you for that.
Thank you, Seth. It was the greatest honor of my life. Thank you.
You're welcome. And to our listeners and our viewers, thank you all. Whether you were born after 9/11 or know the moment where you were and how it's impacted you, thank you for enduring. And, the best get back is live your life, go out and succeed and struggle and serve and accomplish and have breakdowns and breakthroughs, but keep going forward and keep that line moving. So just thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.